It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Thanks for tuning in with us, America. We appreciate your attendance. We're in the third of our four segments this morning, and in this particular segment, we're going to talk about the new terror police. This is a squad of detectives and criminal investigators that are being hired by the HHS to target consumers and companies that haven't followed the rules of the Obama administration for the new implementation of Obamacare. This is some scary stuff because this harkens back to the statement that Obama made when he was running, in which he said, we need a private army, which is as well funded and so forth as the federal military. And this is exactly what he's talking about. Building this type of, first of all, the DHS, which is a whole, if you want more proof that he's building an army than the DHS, you're in real trouble on the proof perspective. But when we see the number of people who are being brought in and paid and hired to administer against whistleblowers, to penalize people for not participating in Obamacare and other programs, the constant dictatorial mandates that are coming out here, you gotta recognize what he's doing. He's fulfilling his promise. Now you say, well, that's not an army. Well, it is, because when you have the IRS as a weapon, and that the IRS has the ability to investigate and reach into every American life. And we know that they are not an objective organization because the proof was everywhere in front of us. And we know that they've got a lot to hide, or Lois Lerner wouldn't have pled the fifth at a congressional hearing, would she? So after Obamacare was passed, post-Obamacare law hiring at the Department of Health and Human Services included 86 criminal investigators. Now, the authorization that was signed on the day that Obamacare went into law, they were authorized to hire 1,814 new people. By the way, when you do the math on that, that turns into be it's $135 million a year. But here's the real problem. The authorization included positions for 50 criminal investigators. And the agency unilaterally, on its own, without any permission or authorization or review by anyone, increased that number from 50 to 86. Really? I mean, says who? Is no one reining in the government? Is no one penalizing these people for violations that would put ordinary non-government employees in prison? Here's the worst part. In this authorization for hires, the agency was authorized to hire 261 consumer safety officers. They've only hired 2. So they overhired by 36 the number of criminal investigators, and they underhired the watchdog group, the consumer safety officer group, by 259. I got to tell you, that is criminal in and of itself. Because what it tells you is that consumer safety affairs people their role is supposed to be as a government-funded ombudsman. Now, you've all heard me talk about the ombudsman program that I promote. And it specifically says that an ombudsman cannot be independent and objective if they are paid for by the government or answer directly to the government. Because, you know, the nature of humanity says that you will do what you need to do to keep your job. And that in and of itself is such a subtle corruption that you don't even recognize it in yourself. And so, you know, the first lay down is a struggle, but then after that they all come easy kind of thing. And, you know, you can be influenced and cajoled and manipulated into thinking that, yeah, you know, this really isn't such a bad thing, and I guess I should overlook this slight. Well, that's not a watchdog's job. A watchdog is supposed to be there to say, you cannot step over this line, and there's nothing that can make me say it's okay. And if you do step over that line, I will call you on it, I will throw the flag on the play, and I am an independent umpire. You cannot be an independent umpire if you work for the football team that you're umpiring. I mean, really, isn't that the truth? Why are the umpires hired and paid for by not the teams themselves, but the NFL? Because if you work for the Giants, or you work for the Eagles, or you work for the Dallas Cowboys, how can you independently and objectively sit there and umpire a game that they're involved in? I mean, these are the most basic conflict issues and ethical issues that have been settled so long ago in humanity that it's not even worth having to point them out. But when you have a conflict of interest that is so egregious to the actual functioning of your job, then I see no point in even having you on the staff. To make matters worse, it's not bad enough that these people are already compromised because they're paid by the person they're supposed to be watchdogging, but to make matters even worse, and this is going to kill you, they underhired them by like 5,000%. They were supposed to hire 261, and they only brought on 2. So who's going to watch the watchers? This whole thing is so far beyond the bounds of even the most... I mean, look, a 5-year-old has better ethical concepts than what we're experiencing here. Even a 5-year-old says, you know, my mom can't be a fair arbitrator in this situation because I'm her son and she's going to rule for me. I mean, these are not complicated ideas for people to understand. The problem here is not whether or not they're easy to understand. The problem is people don't know it's happening. And why is that? Well, that leads us to the next subject of this search for the watchdog, because that's supposed to be the independent media. That is supposed to be the fourth estate. That is supposed to be the newspaper. That's supposed to be the television news. They're supposed to be watching government and saying, we are the ombudsman who are unpaid by you because we're paid by our advertisers, right? And so we're not seeking government funding. We are independent watchdogs of government. And yet, they're not. 1,600 new employees hired by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. 2 described as consumer safety officers, but 86 tasked with criminal investigating. Obviously, the agency is building an army of detectives to sleuth out the violations that they anticipate are going to come in a flood as Obamacare becomes legally implementable on October 1st. Now, they authorized 1,814 new hires under an emergency. By the way, the funny part of, you know, every time you hear emergency, know that that means that there are no boundaries on any of these hires. In other words, anytime they use an emergency authority, that means all bets are off. They don't have to follow any rules. Nobody can monitor, you know, and oversee anything that's going on. Everything can be done without any ethics oversight or any rules. I'm reminded of the Madison quote that crisis is the rallying cry of the tyrant, and so is the emergency order. Right? Anytime you hear the word emergency order, know that is the rallying cry of the tyrant, because it means that they're shielded from review. It means that there's no accountability. An emergency, by its very nature, authorizes action that would be outside of the normal process and policy. Okay. The Mail Online, which is the Daily Mail UK, out of these 1,684 positions that were filled, the total cost to the taxpayers is $138.8 million. I did the math on it. It's about $83,000 per year per person. And filling all the jobs, it would actually bounce that a little higher to about $160 million annually. You see, this is building, again, the concept of this vast bureaucracy that is accountable to no one. Not one person in HHS is elected. Not a single one. They all answer to an ideologue like Sebelius, who, we've proven over and over and over and over and over again, has no ethics, no morals, no integrity, no honor. She will do anything. She is Machiavellian in her machinations. In other words, in her opinion, the end justifies the means. And she doesn't care how many dead bodies she's got to step on to achieve her goal. That's the truth. We've seen it over and over and over with her. She doesn't mind cutting corners, skirting the law, changing the law, sweeping things under the rug, as long as her mantra is, I got this thing implemented. That's my resume. That's what she's doing. She's building her resume for higher office. And she doesn't really care about anything other than achieving that goal, because that qualifies her in the syphilitic eyes of the diseased eyes of these people who will actually hire her for higher office and higher positions. Really. When the disease is rampant, and when you look at the fact that these people will look at that report card punch that says Kathleen Sebelius is a hero because she accomplished the ACA, the Obamacare, and implemented it. And they don't look deeper than that to see, well, how many people did she have to kill to get there, right? To get to the top of the hill. If a general sits there and says, I was successful in this battle because I achieved the taking of this hill, but he lost every man in his battalion except 5, is that really a success? So they've hired these 86 criminal investigators, and they increased unilaterally without any oversight or anybody getting any permission. This is the old adage of it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. They bounced the number from 50 to 86. And I got to ask, who gave them permission to do that? And why do you need 86? The law says, first of all, this is not a criminal issue if you opt out. And I can tell you why they've hired 86. Because they're hearing the rumblings that the nation is basically shaking to. You know what those rumblings are? Just opt out. In other words, play no part, don't sign up. Since we can't get Congress, the compromised, to defund this thing and kill it, we can kill it ourselves by opting out, and we'll basically just starve the beast to death. It'll collapse like a house of cards on a windy day, and that'll be the end of Obamacare, irrespective of Congress's inaction in our protective behalf. And they're hearing that. Make no mistake about it. They've got their agents, according to Cass Sunstein from our earlier thing, who are listening in on the blogs and visiting the websites and hearing what people are saying on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram and all these different, blogs and forums. They're paying attention. They've got an army of people out there because Cass was successful in his pitch that this is the way, government should operate. Set up a conspiracy to break up the conspiracy theorists. They're successful in it. They know exactly what the rumblings are in the street. They've forbidden the mainstream media to talk about it. So what they're going to do is they're going to hire a defensive position in advance. Now, the way that the law is written states that the worst that they can do to you is to penalize you for future tax refunds. In other words, hold back tax refunds, but they can't apply liens to you. And in other words, the teeth in the Obamacare law are relatively mild. They're nubs. But if they're hiring criminal investigators, you can bet that they're writing criminal ramifications into the authorities in this bill. And if they don't have them now, they will shortly. And you see, what will happen is it'll never go before Congress for a review. These will be regulations and rules that operate as law. In other words, they parade about as law, masked as law. But they will not be law. They will be policy. But people will be fined, penalized, broken, destroyed, and imprisoned over rules and regulations that have never seen the light of a congressional review. Mark my words, and I know it to be a fact, and I'll tell you how. Because first of all, there are tens of thousands, there are millions of regulations out there that Americans run afoul of every day that they can be imprisoned for. And all of them were written by administrative agencies that literally have no authority because the Constitution says no law shall be passed by anything other than Congress, by any body other than Congress. Well, if that's the case, then how can you allow administrative law to penalize a business from the EPA, let's say, to penalize a business into bankruptcy, or to imprison a guy for failing? See, what they do is they say, well, this doesn't carry criminal implications. It's civil. Okay, so what happens is the guy fails to pay the $5 million fine because he spilled a gallon of oil in his oil change business on the ground, and the EPA came in and said he's got to remove, the dirt for 1,000 yards around it, 8 feet deep, right? And he fails to pay the $5 million. So now he's criminally in default of their order. So now he can be thrown in prison. You see, or they tax you, and then if you fail to pay the tax, then they imprison you. That's how they imprisoned me. They didn't imprison me for possession of a firearm. They imprisoned me for failure to pay the tax. It was a Title 26. Title 26 is IRS code, not criminal code. And that's exactly what they do. They use these other agencies as minion tools. In other words, the great ogre is the federal government. And on its belt, it carries these weapons: the IRS, the EPA, the DHS, the DEA. They carry these weapons about with them. And from time to time, they'll use the sledgehammer and find that it's not quite effective enough. So then they pull out the next weapon, the IRS, which is a sharpened axe, and wacko, there you go. They succeed. That's how this operates. That's why this is a government operating in tyranny. The only reason you haven't acknowledged that in your own mind and in your own heart and publicly is because the Ministry of Propaganda is keeping that from you. They will not acknowledge it. They will not admit it. They will not openly discuss it. And so America is constantly inundated with this mantra that government is here to help. I got to ask you, when was the last time you saw government take a move that helped? Even in the things they do that allegedly are supposed to help you, ultimately they hurt you. And if you are naive enough to think that everything that they do and the actions that come as a consequence, and the unintended consequence. There is no unintended consequence. That's my point. Everything is intended. The outcome is known long in advance. How do I know that? Because government operates on the war game principle. They are able to, with the help of computers, build these models about how people's reactions and behavior is going to, and reception of a specific issue is going to affect the outcome of this or that or the next thing. The military's been doing it for all of military existence. If you don't think for a minute that these think tank organizations don't sit around and model the behavior of Americans, how they're going to react to the Obamacare law, how they're going to react to the NDAA and indefinite detention, you're wrong. They are using every tool at their disposal, and their resources and tools are unlimited. You are left to fend with nothing more than your own mind. You don't have any weapons at all. You are defenseless in the face of this onslaught. The only weapon you have is your mind. And if you're not utilizing that to evaluate and understand and be situationally aware of the criticality of our current desperate situation, then you have disarmed yourself. These people have evil intent for you. You may think it's unintended consequence. They know full well that it is consequence of intent. They passed Obamacare knowing full well that, and don't tell me that they didn't spend millions upon millions of dollars in supercomputer power processing models that told them what would happen to American business, how American businesses would do exactly what they're doing now. Cut everybody back to part-time, cut themselves below 50 employees so they'd be exempted, or basically kick everybody off the system and say we can no longer afford, so we're going to just pay the penalty because it's less than the actual cost of the insurance, which would thereby force everybody into a single-payer, universal payer system owned by whom? Uncle Sam. Come on, man. You know what? You don't even need a computer model to know that that's what's going to happen. So if you don't think, if you know for a fact that you don't need a computer model because you saw this coming, how much more effective was their preview of current events today when they had the power to sit there and take empirical evidence, throw it into a thing, and come out with a graph? Please, explain where I'm wrong here. Tell me how I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, tell me where. Email me to mike@americasvoicenow.org. Email it to me. Tell me I'm wrong. Put the subject line, "You're wrong on Obamacare." I mean, if you're one of those, Cass Sunstein conspiracy theorist destructors, then by all means, please do me a favor and send me a written, well-reasoned, articulate explanation for how I'm wrong. Give me the talking points, but also give me the subject matter beneath it. Don't just tell me the talking point. I want to hear the meat. Don't show me the feathers. Show me the meat. You don't have any meat. Everybody knows what's happening in this administration. Those that don't know are either willfully ignorant or just, too stupid to get another job, I guess. I don't know. What I can tell you is this. In government, there's no such thing as coincidence. We're going to take a break. Find us at americasvoicenow.org. We'll be back in just a moment, and we're going to tap on our last topic, which is an important one because they're planning to bolster the southern border of Mexico. Wait till you hear this.